On the morning of her wedding, when the church doors were already open and the future felt sealed, a woman's past stepped out of the shadows. Her best friend chose the worst possible moment to confess a love he had buried for years. The man waiting at the altar was not a stranger, but his brother. And as the bells prepared to ring, one sentence shattered everything she thought she knew about loyalty, love, and choice. Hello, my friends. I am Olivia, and this is Olivia's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I always believed peace was something you earned by making the right decisions and sticking to them, that if you chose carefully enough, loved responsibly enough, life would eventually reward you with calm. That belief was the reason I was standing in the bridal suite that morning, my hands trembling as I smoothed invisible wrinkles from a dress that cost more than my first car. My name is Claire, and more than love, I needed certainty. The room smelled faintly of roses and hairspray, sweet and sharp all at once. Outside, sunlight spilled through stained glass, painting slow-moving colors across the walls like blessings I wasn't sure I deserved. Bridesmaids laughed somewhere behind me, their voices floating like they belonged to another life. My reflection stared back from the mirror, composed, polished, almost convincing. I was marrying Daniel because Daniel was safe, because he loved me openly, steadily, without confusion, because he asked me questions about the future and waited for answers. He never disappeared into silence. He never made me guess. Daniel's brother, Ethan, on the other hand, had always been a question mark. Ethan was my best friend long before he was the groom's brother. We met years ago, back when life felt lighter, back when I still believed love was something reckless and cinematic. He knew my coffee order before I did. He listened in that dangerous way that made you feel seen. But Ethan never chose me, not when it mattered, not when I waited. So I learned to let go. Or at least, I learned to bury things neatly. When Daniel came into my life, everything made sense on paper. He was kind, he was present. He didn't make my heart race, but he made it rest. After years of emotional whiplash, rest felt like love. When he proposed, the ring heavy and certain in his palm, I said yes before doubt could speak. That morning, as I reached for my bouquet, someone knocked softly at the door. I assumed it was a bridesmaid with a forgotten lipstick, or my mother checking if I was breathing. But when I opened it, the air changed. It sickened, like a storm pressing its face against the windows. Ethan stood there. He looked nothing like the smiling groomsmen I'd seen earlier. His tie was loosened, his jaw tight, his eyes darker than I remembered, like he hadn't slept, like he'd been carrying something sharp in his chest all night. "Claire," he said quietly. The church behind him seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere far away, the organ began to swell, testing its notes, unaware it was about to become a witness. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered. "I know," he replied. His voice shook just enough to scare me. "But if I don't say this now, I'll lose you forever." My fingers tightened around the bouquet as he stepped closer, his words already breaking through the fragile peace I had built. "Before you walk down that aisle," Ethan said, his eyes locking onto mine, "you need to know the truth about why I never stopped loving you, and why my brother was never supposed to be the one standing at that altar." And in that moment, just as the doors of the church began to open, my certainty cracked. Ethan's words hung between us, heavy and dangerous, as if the air itself had thickened to keep them from escaping. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs, I was sure he could hear it. Somewhere down the hall, footsteps echoed, steady and expectant. Time was moving forward without my permission. "What are you saying?" I whispered. My voice didn't sound like mine anymore.
Ethan swallowed, his throat working as if every word cost him something. "I'm saying I made the biggest mistake of my life by staying silent. And today I refuse to do it again."
I shook my head, a small, frantic motion. "This isn't fair. Not today. You had years, Ethan. Years." "I know," he said quickly, stepping back as if giving me space would make this less cruel. "And that's the regret that's been eating me alive. When you and I were whatever we were, I was terrified of failing you, of ruining you. I thought stepping aside was the noble thing to do." A bitter laugh slipped out of me before I could stop it. "So you stepped aside and watched me fall in love with your brother?" "I watched you try to," he said softly. "There's a difference." That hurt more than I expected, because part of me knew he was right. The memory rushed in without warning. Late-night conversations on Ethan's balcony, the city humming below us, the way his shoulder always brushed mine like it was accidental when it never was. How he'd look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. How I waited for him to choose me, and how he never did. "I needed you," I said, my eyes burning. "I needed you to choose me when it mattered."
"And I didn't," he admitted. His voice cracked, and for the first time, Ethan looked scared. "That's why I don't deserve forgiveness. But you deserve the truth."
Behind him, someone laughed, a bright, unaware sound. The wedding coordinator's heels clicked against marble. My pulse spiked. This moment was shrinking fast. "What truth?" I asked. Ethan took a breath, deep and steady, like a man about to jump. "Daniel proposed to you because he thought I was over you. He asked me first if it would hurt me, and I lied." The floor felt unsteady beneath my feet. "You what?" "I told him I never loved you," Ethan said. "I told him you were just a friend, because if I admitted the truth, I would have had to fight for you, and I was afraid I'd lose." My chest tightened painfully. Daniel's smiling face flashed in my mind, the way he held my hands, the trust in his eyes. My stomach twisted with guilt. "So you let him marry me," I said slowly, "to protect yourself." "I let him marry you to punish myself," Ethan replied. "I thought watching you be happy without me was what I deserved." The organ grew louder now, confident, filling the space with a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. A bridesmaid called my name faintly from inside the suite. "You should go," I said, even though my feet wouldn't move. "This changes nothing." Ethan looked at me then. Not pleading, not dramatic, just honest, raw. "I don't expect you to stop the wedding," he said. "I just couldn't let you walk down that aisle believing a lie." My eyes stung as I stared at him. And what if knowing this ruins everything? "Then at least it'll be the truth that ruins it," he said. A pause. Long. Shattering. Then a voice echoed down the hallway. Daniel's voice. Warm, excited, calling my name. Ethan stepped back into the shadows just as the doors began to open. And I stood there, caught between the man I chose for safety and the man who chose truth too late. The doors closed behind me with a soft finality, but inside my chest, nothing settled. The aisle stretched out like a narrowing path, white petals scattered underfoot, faces turning toward me with smiles full of expectation. The organ rose, rich and triumphant, yet every note pressed against my ribs like a question demanding an answer. Daniel stood at the altar, taller somehow, straighter, his eyes bright the moment they found mine. That look, pure trust, nearly broke me. I took a step forward. then another, my heels clicking in a rhythm that felt too loud. Each step carried Ethan's words with it, trailing behind me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I told myself to breathe, to focus on the present, on the man I had chosen. But the truth has a way of slipping through the smallest cracks. When I reached Daniel, he squeezed my hands, grounding and warm. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his smile wide enough to steady me for half a heartbeat. I smiled back, practiced and fragile. The officiant began, voice calm and rehearsed, speaking about love and commitment, about choosing each other every day. I listened. I really tried, but my mind kept drifting to the side aisle where Ethan stood among the groomsmen, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed somewhere just past me. He didn't look at me once. Somehow that hurt more than if he had. The vows came too quickly.
Daniel spoke first. His words were earnest, thoughtful, full of promises he fully intended to keep. He talked about partnership, about building a life brick by brick. As he spoke, I realized something terrifying. He meant every word. There was no deception in him, only faith.
Then it was my turn.
The room seemed to tilt as all eyes turned to me. My mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Silence spread, thick and uncomfortable. I heard the faint rustle of fabric, a cough somewhere in the pews. Daniel's thumb brushed my knuckles in a gentle question.
I swallowed.
I promise, I began, my voice shaking despite my effort to steady it. I promise to choose you, to stand by you, to build a life with honesty and care.
The word honesty echoed too loudly in my head.
As I continued, something inside me unraveled. Every sentence felt heavier than the last, like I was stacking stones on a foundation that might already be cracked. I finished to polite murmurs of approval, but my heart was pounding with the knowledge of what I hadn't said.
The officiant smiled. "If anyone here objects to this union," he said, almost casually, "speak now or forever hold your peace." It was supposed to be ceremonial, symbolic, a line no one ever answers. The silence stretched. Then a single step sounded from the side aisle. The room shifted, like a collective inhale. I turned before I could stop myself. Ethan stood there, no longer hiding, his shoulders squared, his face pale but determined. Murmurs rippled through the guests like a sudden wind through leaves. Daniel stiffened beside me. "Ethan?" Daniel said, confusion threading his voice. "What are you doing?" Ethan's eyes finally met mine. There was no drama in them now, only resolve. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice carrying through the church, "but I can't hold my peace." My heart dropped into my stomach. Daniel turned to me slowly, questions already forming in his eyes. "Claire?" he asked softly. "What is he talking about?" The officiant hesitated, unsure, the ceremony suspended in a fragile moment that felt like it might shatter. Ethan took another step forward. "Before you say I do, my brother deserves the truth," he said, "and so do you." Daniel's hand tightened around mine, and I realized, with terrifying clarity, that in a few seconds, everything would change, no matter what I chose to say next. The church felt impossibly small then, like all the walls had leaned in to listen. The officiant's smile had vanished, replaced by uncertainty. Somewhere in the back, a guest shifted in their seat, the sound echoing far louder than it should have. I could feel Daniel's hand around mine, firm, possessive, trembling. "Ethan," Daniel said, his voice low, edged with warning, "this isn't funny."
I know, Ethan replied. That's why I'm doing it. I inhaled sharply, the air catching in my throat. Every instinct told me to speak, to stop this before it went any further, but the truth was already moving faster than I could contain it. I loved her first, Ethan said. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. Daniel's hand slipped from mine as if burned. What? Daniel whispered. Ethan didn't look at him right away. His eyes stayed on me, filled with regret so deep it felt like an apology stretched across years. I've loved Claire for a long time, before you ever met her, and when you asked me if it would hurt, I lied. Daniel turned to me then, disbelief etched across his face. Claire, is this true? My heart hammered. I tasted salt as tears blurred my vision. I didn't know he would say this today, I said quickly. I never asked him to. But you loved him, Daniel said, the realization settling like dust after a collapse. It wasn't an accusation, it was a wound. I closed my eyes for a moment, the weight of the dress pressing down on me, the future I had planned cracking open. When I opened them, I nodded. I did, I said, a long time ago. And now? Daniel asked. The question sliced deeper than any confession. Now. That single word carried everything: safety, loyalty, fear, desire, truth. I don't know, I admitted. I chose you because I thought love was supposed to feel certain. I thought wanting peace meant I was doing the right thing. Ethan finally looked at his brother. I'm not asking her to choose me, he said hoarsely. I just couldn't let you build a marriage on my lie. Daniel laughed once, sharp and hollow. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. My own brother, he murmured. At my wedding. I'm sorry, Ethan said again. Silence fell, thick and final. Daniel looked at me one last time. His eyes were wet but steady. I deserve someone who chooses me without doubt, he said quietly. Then he turned to the officiant. This wedding is over. The words hit harder than any shout could have. Gasps, whispers, movement, but I barely registered them. Daniel walked past me, past Ethan, down the aisle alone. Each step echoed like a closing door. I stood there, shaking, as guests slowly began to leave, their curiosity heavy and unkind. The flowers wilted under the weight of what had just happened. The future I had planned dissolved in real time. When the church was nearly empty, Ethan approached me carefully, like someone nearing a wounded animal. I ruined your life, he said. I let out a broken laugh. No, I replied, you shattered an illusion. Weeks later, when the world had quieted and the scandal had faded, Ethan and I sat on that same old balcony from years ago. The city hummed below us, familiar and forgiving. I don't want certainty anymore, I told him. I want truth, even if it's messy. Ethan reached for my hand, tentative this time. I can't promise perfect, he said, but I'll never choose silence again. And for the first time, I didn't need peace. I needed honesty. And that finally felt like love.